Greetings and welcome to the Conference Board's December Window On webcast. This month's focus will be upon the retail sector, changes in consumer spending, and how retailers are responding for future growth. Please know that you may earn CPI NASBA credits for participating in, CPE NASBA credits for participating in this webcast. Click the link in the CEU request pod in the bottom right corner of the webcast console to sign up for the credit. Stay online for the entire webcast, then click OK for 3 pop-ups that occur during the program. In today's webcast, we will explore key trends in the consumer retail sector and their impact on the economy and business, identify solutions to challenges associated with shifts in the way that households acquire and consume goods and services, and also discover how these changes will impact the upcoming holiday shopping season, plus spending over the next few years and what executives should do to prepare. We have 3 distinguished guests joining us for today's webcast. Our first guest is Mr. Mike Archbold. Mike is the current Chief Executive Officer of the Council for Inclusive Capitalism at the Vatican and the former CEO of GNC Holdings. He's also a trustee for the Conference Board's Committee for Economic Development. Mike's 30-plus years of experience include strategic, operational, and financial leadership across national retailers, including Talbot's, the Vitamin Shoppe, Barnes & Noble, as well as the GNC. Our second guest is Mr. Steve Odland. Steve is our current president and CEO of the Conference Board, Inc., the most widely cited private source of business intelligence. Steve has extensive corporate background, having served as chairman and CEO of the Office Depot, Inc., chairman and president and CEO of AutoZone, and president and CEO of Tops Markets, Inc. Our third guest is Ms. Elizabeth Crowfoot. Elizabeth is a senior economist in labor markets at the Conference Board. Elizabeth researches labor market trends, authors the quarterly Global Consumer Confidence Report, and leads the International Labor Comparisons Program. Her research also focuses upon consumer confidence trends, consumption, and the gig economy. Finally, I will be moderating the conversation. I am Dana Peterson, Chief Economist at the Conference Board. Following the moderated conversation, we will allow for participant Q&A. However, you may ask questions through the discussion in the chat function at the bottom of your screen. So let's begin the discussion with an assessment of how the ongoing pandemic is driving consumer dynamics. So Elizabeth, what shifts have you identified in the way that households spend amid COVID-19?
Hi, Dana. Good to be here today. Yes, the really short answer on this is that we've seen a transition in consumption from services to goods. And what we're seeing here in this chart is the percent change in real consumer spending. And it's comparing 2 recessionary periods. And this current recession that we're in is very unique in that in previous recessionary periods, generally we see consumers pull back on goods. And spending on services is generally more resilient. And that's because people still need to get their hair cut. They still need to go out and occasionally eat out dinner or go to a movie. And obviously those type of services are not an option for many of us because of the pandemic right now. So we are seeing that people are shifting those that money that they would be spending on recreational type services and really shifting that to mostly durable goods. And that's what you see here in the chart. In the orange bars, you see the spending on durable goods during the current recession is 13.9% when you compare pre-pandemic in February to our state in October. There's been a lot of growth in durable goods as well as non-durable goods. And then you see that consumption in services during this time has really pulled back. So declined almost 7% compared to in the previous recession. It barely changed at all. So that's where we are in terms of that shift from services to consumption. So if we can move this, actually my mouse is freezing a little bit. Oh, there we go. Oh, thank you. Oh, sorry. Let me go back one. And just to dig in a little bit, what people have been spending their money on, right? So let me walk you through this chart. This is showing percent change in real consumer spending for specific product categories. Again, from pre-pandemic in February levels compared to October levels so you can see what the change has been. So if you look at the blue bars, this is the percent change for electronics and digital devices. So there's been a lot of spend in this area. So computers, tablets, other digital devices like smartwatches, also small electric, household, and personal care appliances, video and audio equipment, for example, streaming boxes and headsets and webcams, all of that, televisions as well towards the bottom. So this consumer electronics has really boomed throughout this pandemic. In the red bars, you see leisure-related goods, and this is what I was talking about before, that shift in spending, especially for recreational, entertainment type services to leisure-related goods. So people are spending money on games, toys, and hobbies, especially gaming consoles, newspapers and periodicals, sporting equipment, bikes, motorcycles, recreational vehicles, items for their pets, alcohol at home, and even books. All of these are recreational type goods that people have been increasing their spending on. And also because we're spending so much time at home, household goods consumption has increased, and those are the items in green. So furniture, especially desks, as people are working from home and learning from home now. Tools and equipment for house and garden, as people look into their really work on their home improvement projects, and also household furnishings such as window coverings and rugs and lamps and other decorative items to make our space feel more homey while we're spending more time in it. And finally, one other category here, small personal accessories, that's in yellow. So items like jewelry and watches, luggage, handbags, and other similar personal items. These are really luxury type items that people have been spending on. So people aren't taking vacations, they're not going out to fancy dinners anymore, but they're spending on these luxury type items, really splurging in this area. And when we talk about that K-shaped recovery, this is that top part of that K. The people who are working from home, saving their money, they're able to spend in this area. And when you compare that to the orange bars, these are the non-discretionary type items, food at home, for example, personal care products, utilities like electricity and gas, internet and household cleaning and paper products, and other household supplies. Those are the type of products that everyone really needs, that people were stockpiling at the beginning of the pandemic, and for the most part that has continued, that type of behavior has continued throughout this pandemic. So you see growth in those areas as well. If we go to the next slide. Great, thank you. And a lot of that I mentioned has been boosted by this surge in e-commerce during the pandemic. And there are two lines here. Both of these are showing electronic shopping, right? Trends in electronic shopping. If you focus for a second on the blue line, this feeds into the left-hand side axis. We see that on an annual percentage change, growth in e-commerce is about 30%. This is the number that I've been hearing a lot in the media that people are really throwing out there. So this is comparing September 2020 to September 2019, which is huge. But if you really think about the composition of retail, right, this is the orange line. Electronic shopping as a percent of total retail sales. So before the pandemic in February, we were about 13% or so. And now we're at about 16%. And that 3 percentage point increase doesn't sound as impressive, right? But when you think about that it takes a full year to increase that share of e-commerce by 1%, we've essentially jumped 3 percentage points in a matter of months. So we are now where we should be in 2023, right? We've accelerated that shift in e-commerce by several years. So, and that's, you know, a trend that we are likely to continue to see as we move through this pandemic. So I'll stop there with my comments. Dana, I'll shoot it back to you. Dana, I think you're muted.
Yeah, so these are great insights for the U.S., and this is actually a preview of an upcoming report that you're going to be publishing on the effects of COVID-19 on industries not only what happened this year, but what we should expect for industry going forward. Mike, how these consumer trends that Elizabeth discussed affect the outlook for 2020 holiday season? Mike is muted.
I'm muted now.
I'm muted now.
Okay, you're good.
I should not be muted. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay, good. And there's Steve. So Yang's all here. So thank you first off, and Elizabeth, great insights, and thank you for sharing it. I love the work that the conference board does and provides insights on this. So I think to your point, Dana, there's clearly an impact that we're going to see on holiday spending, even coming into the holiday spending. The ranges of estimates were anywhere from 1% to 2%. Some folks were a little bit more optimistic, but I think having gone through it, we're certainly going to see winners and losers here. And I think, to Elizabeth's point, the winners, which you talked about in terms of the categories, but just to even dive a little bit further, even within categories, there's winners and losers because, for instance, apparel was still on the plus side on the consumer spending side, but if you then dissect even within the apparel space, folks who are selling, loungewear and casual wear are obviously going to be much better situated than those who are selling, wear to work wear, and that's certainly going to be a challenge that we're going to see going forward. And the big takeaway, which I had very similar to yours, Elizabeth, which is a number of the trends that we've seen here were trends that were already going on. What happened was we just leapfrogged 3 years forward on so many of these trends about things like e-com or buy online, pick up in store, whatever those trends are. They've really just leapfrogged.
So Steve, what are your thoughts around the trends that Elizabeth discussed, and what implications might they have for the holiday season?
It looks to me like growth should be about 4 to 5% this year if you exclude autos, gas, and restaurants. Of course, restaurants are getting killed in this COVID environment. Online is going to be the big winner, of course, with about a 33% growth, and I think most of that growth will be in mobile. People are using these rather than laptops these days to shop, and they're doing comparison shopping even sometimes when they're able to stand in a store. So e-commerce sales, if you look at the third quarter, we're up almost 37%, which is an incredible number when you think in retail. Mike and I have been doing this a long time. You just don't see these massive kind of movements in any one short period of time, so this is extraordinary. Online share of total could be as much as a third. And that's up considerably. It's more than double what online sales have been in the past. And you see 2/3 of consumers saying that they're going to spend more this year, which is incredible given that we just had this incredibly deep recession. And not clear that we're out of it, as you know, but the second quarter recession is the deepest the deepest quarter decline ever in our country's history. I think when you start looking at, okay, where are the winners and losers going to be? Electronics of any sort, from noise-canceling headphones to earpods to RoboVacs, hobbies, home, people are cooking, so you're seeing Instapots go like crazy, toys, gaming, mobile phones, and anything that says Apple on it should do very well this season. And I think that the season is going to be different because you didn't see the big spike on Black Friday. You saw it start as early as October and go all the way. It will go all the way through the holiday season. As Mike and I know very well, when you have too much inventory, that season even extends into January. And I think you're going to see this being a very, very long season this year. Black Friday store visits were down 52%, which you could say is a good thing because it wasn't a super spreader event, but it is being spread out both from a bricks and mortar standpoint and an e-commerce standpoint. So an incredibly different retail season for us.
Indeed. So among these trends that we're seeing in terms of household spending for the holiday season, including goods versus services, discretionary items, versus non-discretionary and luxury, e-commerce, streaming, virtual experiences. Among all of these trends, which ones do you think will have the greatest stickiness post-pandemic? Mike, what are your thoughts on this?
So I think that there's a number of things that will stick with us post-pandemic. Probably first and foremost is going to be, believe it or not, the earlier and ever earlier holiday season break. Steve mentioned it before. You know, I think effectively we could say that the holiday season this year began on Prime Day, and really hasn't let up. You know, I think that retailers are forever looking for a reason to break for a holiday ever earlier. So when you thought it couldn't get any earlier, we're now going to come before Halloween. So I think that is certainly one of the trends that you're going to see. And I do think that, you know, in addition, we should continue to see a slower climb back for the experiential types of spending. So I think that while they'll come back from such a dramatic decline, I think that we'll continue to see more spending in certain areas. And I think, you know, whether it be the home electronics or the workout at home, the sports equipment, these are all categories that I think will continue to benefit from what has been this, you know, Steve described this tectonic shift that usually takes many years to occur that's happened in the course of months instead.
Steve, do you agree?
You know, it's hard for me to see that once, you know, COVID is under control, once the vaccine is through the population, even when you're, you know, 2023, 2024 even, that it's going to return to the way things were in 2018 or 2019. I just think that once we have gotten this many people shopping on their phones, shopping through e-commerce sites, it's going to change irrevocably. You know, there will be some flow back, of course, but I think it will be different. You are going to see huge shifts in social media. I think social media, which of course we use for communication and a lot of other things, I think will be used much more as a commercial tool. You see Amazon becoming the huge winner here. You know, Amazon has hired 427,000 people in the last 10 months. 420, almost 500,000 people in 10 months. This is an enormous tectonic shift if you think about it. They control 40% of all e-commerce, 7% of retail. Now Walmart has emerged as the #2 player, surpassing eBay in e-commerce with 5 to 6% of e-commerce. Other winners are, of course, eBay itself, Apple, Target, Wayfair, Overstock, Shopify. These are names that you don't see on bricks and mortar stores, you know, in the mall. So I think, you know, the whole shift to a different kind of experience. And then I think once people flow back into a bricks and mortar environment, I think it will be for experiential reasons, more services than goods. I think goods are easy to buy. Of course, you cannot get your hair styled, you know, via the internet yet. And so I think it'll be those kinds of services which will continue to happen in bricks and mortar.
Unless you buy a wig. Thank you, Steve. So we've talked about some of the consumer trends. Now let's talk about the retail industry in particular. And I noticed that earlier, just before we started, that UPS is going to be placing restrictions on packages for select companies like Gap and Nike. This is in the news, so it's not anything proprietary here. But, you know, this is an example of how COVID-19 has really disrupted the industry for good or bad. So I'm going to go around the table here and start with Elizabeth in terms of, you know, what are some of the things that you're seeing in terms of disruptions to the retail industry? I know we've all talked a little bit about this, but let's dig a little bit deeper here.
Right. I mean, we've been talking about winners and losers in this space, right? And what comes to mind is the apocalypse of brick and mortar retail. And I don't know if that's being overly dramatic, but we're seeing that this is happening as a combination of the pandemic-related shutdowns and having to operate with reduced capacity, you know, less foot traffic, and also this massive shift to online shopping. So the combination of the two has really led to rising bankruptcies, store closures. In terms of bankruptcies, the U.S. is on pace to hit a 10-year high that's driven by filings in retail, in restaurants, and in entertainment. And that's, the comparison there is right after the Great Recession in 2009, 2010. So we are already in that, space. And it's even more looming is the fact that many of these bankruptcies have been delayed because of the historic fiscal stimulus that happened over the summer. It's just now that some of those small and medium-sized enterprises especially are realizing that they can't hold on much longer. So we're going to see an acceleration of bankruptcies, I think, in the deep fall and winter months. And that's led to concentration, right, in the industry. Those e-commerce giants are going to get bigger, and some of these small, medium-sized enterprises are going to be pushed out of the market, especially those that fail to pivot to a digital model.
So Mike, Elizabeth talked about bankruptcies and zombie companies that are ultimately going to disappear. What are your thoughts in terms of the deep impact on the retail industry from COVID-19 disruptions?
So I think there are many. You're going to continue to see retailers that will file for bankruptcy. That's inevitable with the traffic that is declining in bricks and mortar. So you'll then continue to see a consolidation of the power players within the retail space. So the bigger the better these days. So the big box retailers have been a significant beneficiary of this trend. Many of them were selling essential products, so therefore they were deemed essential and were able to stay open. And then on top of it, what we've seen is consumers concentrating their spend with them because that was the one place to be able to spend. And if you were going to go out, you were going to get everything that you needed to get when you went out. That's really shifted the ball significantly into their court. And at the same time, they've driven their online business. So I think Target's online sales in the month of November were up over 100%. So that enables them to now have better contact with that consumer, be able to really drive the omnichannel experience and really control the conversation with their customers. So I think that there's a very significant shift that you're going to see here. And then even further down the road, I think you'll continue to see kind of as a downstream impact, the impact on malls as a lot of these retailers do go into bankruptcy, and you wind up with things like the real estate players buying up some of these retailers and shifting the use of mall space. So there's a number of downstream consequences that I think you're going to see as a result of this.
Thank you, Mike. So Steve, Mike talked about some of the winners and losers, the big winners being big box stores, losers being malls. What are some of the other effects that you're seeing or anticipating?
Interesting. Once a manufacturer who sells through a retailer, so we call them vendors in the retail world. So the Nikes of the world and so forth. They don't have stores. They have a few stores, but they sell through retailers. Once they see that you can sell direct, why do they need the retailers? And so what you've seen, just taking Nike for an example, is they're cutting their contracts with retailers and they're pulling out of retailers. And I suspect you're going to see Nike at some point go completely out of retail and sell e-commerce only with a couple of their big stores. So that's, any brand that has brand recognition in and of itself doesn't need a retailer now because you can go through a storefront. That's a frightening thing that for all retailers, because it just takes away any retail need that's left, except, as I said, the services. I do think in the meantime, though, you've got a lot of altered things. I think we've learned that you don't need a Black Friday anymore. Black Friday was, okay, they're finished with Thanksgiving, we're going to open at 6 a.m., we're going to have doorbusters. And those doorbusters, the reason you call them doorbusters is because people would line up for these sales and literally break the doors down to get in to the physical store. Why bother? You just click, right, and you can have it shipped to you. I think that retailers will more and more take labor out of their stores and become really a click and pickup site, so that you really buy it online and you go and you pay for it and you stop and pick it up in a store. All of these changes, I think, will have this carryover effect. I don't know that Mike talked about the malls. I don't know how these REITs will survive. I don't know how any mall that's not an A mall will survive. And even the A malls I think you're going to see a lot of that space converted to other services and other use as we go forward. They'll have to, because it just simply won't have the demand that they used to have.
Thanks, Steve. So we should look for the death of browsing and window shopping. Let's talk a little bit about, a little bit on the positive side here. How has the retail industry adapted to these trends and these major shifts in terms of how consumers are consuming and exactly things with risks around bankruptcies, around malls dying, people stopping, people not going into stores anymore. But how is the retail industry adjusting to this? So let's start off with Elizabeth, and then we'll ask Mike and Steve.
Yeah, I mean, Steve sort of touched on one aspect I think that's just been critical to the survival of retail, and that's the click and collect or curbside pickup dynamic. And that was a trend that had already started, right? I think I've been picking my groceries up curbside for years, ever since I've had small children and I can't go into a store with them. But now that's more universal, right? And all of these trends are just, nothing is new. It's just been accelerated. All of these things existed before the pandemic. It's just that those brands with the infrastructure already in place to quickly pivot to those digital models have adjusted faster and have performed better. And then the second point I want to make here is really automation, right? Especially jobs in retail are very vulnerable to automation. Many of those jobs have very repetitive tasks, and they also have a high risk of COVID transmission, both to other employees and to their customers. So think of cashiers, salesperson, and even shipping and receiving clerks. And so there's huge incentives that employers have now to automate these types of occupations to reduce the risk of infection and also to cut costs. We're in a recession. There's lower demand, there's capacity constraints, there's increased costs associated with sanitation standards that have been increased, so more PPE, more hand sanitizer, all of that is increasing the cost of sort of in-person interactions, right? So that's going to really drive incentives to automate, to invest in touchless shopping, self-ordering kiosks, and other AI-enabled customer service type functions as well. So we're really going to be seeing that push to automation as we keep moving through this pandemic, and until we have that vaccine that's more widely available.
Mike, I see you shaking your head yes. What are your thoughts?
So agree, obviously, with everything Elizabeth is saying, and just to build on it, to kind of tie a few things together. That big automation isn't only just in terms of the actual shopping experience itself, whether it be online, but it goes to the background of the CRM, the customer relationship management, right, and being able to understand what the consumer wants and using big data to do that. It's one of those places where those who have been able to do those kinds of things have been more successful, obviously, than those who have not. And then on top of it, using technology and being efficient on logistics and distribution, right? So certainly Amazon has set the standard for when we can expect our goods, which is tomorrow now, right? So this is now the new standard, and those retailers who have invested in advanced distribution, who will have the ability to use their now stores as more mini distribution points to be able to ship directly to consumers or to satisfy Elizabeth's pickup at curbside, right? These are all trends that I think are going to continue, where you're going to see retailers continue to invest. And then even, beyond that, I find it very interesting in terms of understanding, big data, which sounds like this monstrous big thing, but if you think about it, the intent is really to get it down to a demographic of one, because now the consumers really want everything to be very individualized. And it just is a kind of an insight. I find it very curious because we baby boomers grew up in an era when retail for us was a common experience with a generic kind of offering, and our social lives were considered private and one-to-one. versus your Gen Z and millennial folks, it's actually the opposite, where their retail is demanded to be a one-to-one relationship, knowing what my exact needs are, and my social life is okay being entirely public. And then the only trade-off that they have to worry about is, do they get to be so customized and tailorized that they approach what has come to be known as the creepy factor, right? But those who can really individualize the experience for the consumer are going to be the winners going forward.
Thank you, Mike. Steve?
Without repeating the great insights that Elizabeth and Mike shared, a few other things. I think you can see a lot more experimentation. Right now you have Amazon trying to tip their toe into grocery and figure it out. They're doing it through Amazon.com. They did it through Amazon Fresh, Amazon Go, and of course their purchase of Whole Foods in order to give them a physical presence. This has been, confusing, I think, to a lot of people who are trying to figure out how do I buy food from Amazon. But it's an example of, these companies really struggling is the wrong word, but really, I guess, willing to experiment and fail and, find these right models. So that we're living in an exciting time. It happens only every few generations that you see true retail experimentation at this level and breakthrough in the business models, and we're witnessing it and we're participating in it, and only some of it is COVID related. If you look at some of these other trends, it was happening beforehand. I think the whole promotion cadence will change forever. Why do you need to pick a date, and why do you want to do it on the same day as everybody else? So I think you're going to see real time. You see Amazon employees watching real time what happens to every other website, and when somebody go watch when Walmart lowers its price on an item, flip over to Amazon, and you'll follow within very short period of time they match the price. So there's real-time visibility here and price competition, selection competition before your very eyes today, which I think will be forever changed. You see a lot of partnerships. Best Buy is offering additional store pickup, not at their stores, but at UPS locations and at CVS pharmacies. So, and they're not related at all. They're just partners. So now you're going to see the utilization of anybody's bricks and mortar in order to facilitate these pickups. You've got a lot of things. We talked about the last mile, and I will come back to this from a supply chain standpoint. But control of that last mile is going to become important. So you've seen Amazon develop their Prime delivery, and you see these now in urban areas at least. They're not everywhere, but in the urban areas you see Amazon vans delivering, and that's because the power shifted for a while to the FedEx and UPSs of the world, which just started to disintermediate the costs on the retail side. So you're seeing all of this. Final thing I'll say is grocery. Grocery food in this country is $1 trillion business. It's a big deal, and Elizabeth talked about her personal experiences. The challenge is not the dry goods or the middle of the store. The challenge is perishables. And as somebody, I run a retail grocery operation, and it is a challenge. And I was part of the acquisition of Peapod, the very first grocery district e-commerce players, and I was on that board for a while. But making those economics of that last mile delivery work in any retail business is tough. When you do it in grocery, where you're trying to deliver frozen and refrigerated and fresh, and then you've got consumers who don't want you touching their produce and picking it for them, and so this is a big challenge. But the players that get it right and the people that are ahead are Walmart, Target, and Amazon. Those players will win in the long term, and then what happens to all of the local grocery stores after that.
Thanks, Steve. It sounds like there's a lot of creative destruction going on right now, and there's certainly some positive spillover effects. What are some of the other industries that have benefited from changes in the retail sector? Let's start off with Mike.
So other industries that have benefited from the change in retail sector?
Yeah.
So I think it's certainly going to be technology downstream. It's going to be those who are offering access to big data, those who actually have real CRM systems. So there's a whole technology side to it. And then I think, just from a broader industry perspective, those who are experts at logistics, whether it be establishing expert networks on behalf of retailers or being the most efficient third-party logistics provider for smaller retailers who are going to desperately need that kind of efficiency to be able to compete in this market. I think that those are all places where the downstream retail effect will impact. And as we talked about before, I think that one of the real big impacts is going to be in the real estate side, because I think you're going to continue to see this shift in repurposing of more real estate. I do also think that you're going to continue to see some of the real estate REIT players with the liquidity that they have continue to be the buyers of distressed properties within retail. We've seen that in the past with Forever 21. We've seen it with JCPenney. We've seen it with Brooks Brothers. So that we'll continue to see those kinds of trends, which means now the REITs, the mall REITs in particular, really are controlling the entirety of their distribution network, the entirety of the mall, I should say. And that's going to really enable them to repurpose the real estate to its highest and best purpose.
Steve, thank you, Mike. Steve, you touched on this a little bit in your earlier comments, but what do you see as some of the other industries that are benefiting from this evolution in retail?
On a number of them. I would say big tech is going to be a huge winner here, and it does put additional stress on all of the issues that are coming in terms of their control over speech and the kinds of things that you've seen around the election. But it also will spill over into their control of commerce, because I just remember when I was at Office Depot, and this was in the early days of development of e-commerce, but we were spending $75 to $100 million in buying Google AdWords back then, and so today those numbers are exponentially high. That's a lot of money to spend on a search term that you can only use for a very short period of time, and the control of that by and the control of the commerce that goes with that. In other words, when you buy, people may not be familiar with this, but manufacturers, retailers pay to borrow those search terms, and if they pay enough, then when the search gets entered for office products or whatever, the Office Depot site would come to the top rather than being buried on page 142 where the shoppers can't find you. So this is a really big, important thing, and so there's more and more money that are it's going to be pay whatever. I think also the social media, I don't call them big tech, but social media players are going to become bigger and bigger important pieces of this. The whole supply chain, incredibly important, and we talked about the last mile and the local delivery aspects of that. And then finally, the technology players in a distribution center environment. I remember visiting Zappos back 15 years ago. Tony Hsieh, who unfortunately has passed away this week, was the leader of Zappos, but he installed one of the first robotic warehouses, and we adapted that and put it in our warehouses at the time, and then Amazon bought it. And I've been in the Amazon warehouses personally. I've seen these robots in action. The robots go out, they find the product, they bring it back to the front of the distribution center where it's picked, and then the robots go put it away. I mean, you've got these robots going all over the distribution center picking. And so the amount of travel and physical work that's required from the individual employee has changed as a result of this. But the people, this is still new, and Amazon's one of the lead players in this, but there are tens of thousands of other folks out there, of companies that need this kind of technology, and of course it can be advanced even further. Why do you need 10, 15 distribution centers in the United States alone when you could have one of these, and the robots do it, and you ship it out overnight? I mean, the whole supply chain industry will change dramatically, even beyond anything I've already described.
Thank you, Steve. I think that when we're thinking about the outlook for retail in general, I think it's going to be helpful to talk a little bit more about the longer-term opportunities and challenges. And also, it'd be great to hear from Mike and Steve their thoughts on, when, different aspects of retail will bounce back. But before I do that, let's ask Elizabeth, what are just some of the longer-term opportunities and challenges that you see for the retail sector?
Right. Obviously, we've talked a lot about these already, so I think this is a great way to sort of recap the conversation so far. And I talked at the beginning of the webcast about some of the product categories that have really benefited from the pandemic, but there's also been some products that have not benefited. For example, large-scale appliances, right? People, especially those who have lost their jobs or may have seen cuts in wages and salaries, they're not investing in large, appliances like washing machines and, new refrigerators. So what we see is the potential down the line, several years from now, once the vaccine has been widely distributed, employment opportunities are sort of back where they were before, that consumer demand will likely return to pre-COVID levels. And we'll also see this reallocation between online, brick and mortar, and this click and collect. And this is sort of like a three-pronged stool, right, or three-legged stool of retail in a sense, where you've got, the online or e-commerce, obviously, and the in-store shopping, but this click and collect phenomenon, to the extent that we have these lasting behaviors, lasting shift to online shopping, that people are going to want to continue this, convenience seeking and their more digitized lifestyles. That is something that has the potential to continue long after the pandemic has subsided. We talked about rising industry concentration as well. The online retail giants getting bigger, more bankruptcies. One thing I didn't mention was the rising mergers and acquisitions activity. Especially coming into 2020, there were private equity firms that were sitting on a lot of cash. So there's a lot of potential for mergers and acquisitions as sort of the players start to see, how the chips fall. A real relocation away from city centers. So we've seen a rise in remote work, which means that people aren't commuting into the city anymore. They're not taking their lunch break to go, or to go to the retail store, or, buy new clothes during their break, or, other type of shopping that you would do normally while you were at work, or even after work, right? So a lot of the retailers now have that incentive to shift the location of their stores from city centers to more residential areas where people are doing the majority of their shopping now. So we're going to see those retail locations close in those city centers and possibly become last-mile micro-fulfillment centers for the people that are still living in that area or for businesses. And then I also talked about those jobs that are more susceptible to automation. And Steve also talked about these robotic-powered fulfillment centers as well, and all of the other technologies and the tech industry in general that can really benefit from all of these shifts. I mean, these are trends that we see continuing in the future, even after some of the risk from the pandemic has subsided.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So, Mike, Steve, what are C-suite executives saying in terms of opportunities and challenges, as well as, when do they think their industries are going, well, their subsectors within the industry are going to get back to some semblance of normalcy? Mike, I'm sorry.
Sure. So happy to start. So as retailers, we tend to be fairly optimistic at least within our categories. So I think most people will be talking about some kind of return to normalcy, whatever normalcy is going forward. And to Elizabeth's point, I think we'll see growth, but it's going to be dramatically shifted to the digital, to the online, to the buy online, pick up in stores. So while there's going to be growth, it's going to be concentrated in the mass market guys that we talked about before, who are going to be able to control the conversation, and it's going to be concentrated in the nimble specialty players who have invested in technology, who have invested in CRM, who have invested in distribution to be able to be efficient providers going forward. So I think we're going to see the growth in many many respects back to where it was. I don't think you're going to see the experiences come back as quickly, but in terms of the goods, I think we'll continue to see that kind of growth. But again, there'll be winners and losers, not only for those who invest in technology, but it'll also be at the category level where certain categories will continue to outpace. So I'll turn to Steve, and I actually saw one of the questions in the Q&A box, so I know we're going to get to those.
On that, and address a couple of other things. I think there's a huge issue around labor. Retail is one of the largest employers. Retail writ large is one of the largest employers in the country. Truckers is the #1 job. Long-haul truckers, #1 job in the country. All of this is inextricably linked, and as we know, 70% of our economy is the consumer. So all of this is a really important part. Before the pandemic hit, we were talking about being out of labor capacity essentially, and at almost full employment. Whether in fact we were there or close. But you see then a pressure on wages, and you see a lot of people moving up to a $15 minimum wage. When you do that, you then hurdle the costs necessary to invest in automation. And so, there are these trigger points where, a cost of just in a retail store of automating the front end, the checkout, because there's a big cost to those computers and the scanners and all of the equipment. And, as long as it costs more to put that in than it does to employ people, you employ people. But once you hit that, the cost of labor then drives the returns to go up on the automation. So I think that society, we as a society, and the societal pressures on wages and compensation and living wage and all this, I think will pressure automation in retail, even beyond what we've seen. So I think you'll see a lot of that change. I think scale will be continued. It always has been important in retail. I think it will become more important. Because you want to be able to procure the goods in order to offer the best pricing, and so therefore there's going to be a lot of mergers and acquisitions. That also is going to be driven by people trying to catch up with Amazon and Walmart. Walmart had to make, I think, 5 retail or e-commerce acquisitions to try to cobble together the capability and some level of scale to pair with their stores just to get to the level that they are today. So people will have to to merge and bring brands together. And then that's the final point. Mike mentioned these, and I think you mentioned zombie companies. It always makes me smile to hear that term. It sounds like a Halloween opportunity. But you see these brands being acquired by real estate companies, but it could be anybody cobbling these brands together and then controlling the brand. So a Linens and Things or a Circuit City, these old brands that were once whole chains could just become a section on an Amazon website or a Walmart website. And so I think you'll see cobbling together, because I think there's still value in these kinds of brands. So I think M&A and all of that will surge. When are we going to get back to normal? My final word is never, because I don't think normal as we used to call it will exist. But I do think that it will take through 2021 before we get back to some flow back to a semblance of what we would call normal, meaning going back into the retail stores, the bricks and mortar stores, more safely. I'll stop there, Dana.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Mike. Thank you, Elizabeth. We have a few questions here and only a little bit of time. So the first question here online is, even while some of the trends have been accelerated by 3 years, many leaders in retail stores are stuck in the old economy way of doing business. And we're seeing many retailers actually resist change. And so what do you see the shift forward by the 3 years? Is it sustainable or short term? It seems like it's going to be somewhat sustainable, but do you think that retailers are going to revert back to business as usual once the pandemic is behind us, or will they really grasp a hold of these new trends and really run with them? Sorry, it was a long question, but I think that we're getting the.
Yep. So I'll start. Look, I think that the retailers who do not adapt will die. We're already seeing that, and you're going to see an acceleration of that because a lot of these trends for the consumer spending are not going to flip back, right? There's going to be a new normal, and these penetrations for online, this is real. Buy online, pick up in store, click and collect. This is real. So the retailers who refuse to adapt to the new reality will find themselves out on the street. Don't want to overstate it, but that's the reality.
Dana and I had started earlier talking about the retail apocalypse, right? And to be honest, it's not all doom and gloom. There is a place for brick and mortar stores. It's a form of entertainment. People want to go out and shop, and they want to touch and feel, and they want to return their products that they bought online rather than go to the hassle of packaging it up and dropping it off. So I think it's that realization that, like Mike said, retailers have to adapt, and that's part of the adaptation is that new role for retail space.
So
I think that small brands will be developed by the entrepreneurs of the world and then acquired. I don't think large companies are very good at developing big businesses. I think you'll see more of that. I don't see the government, getting involved in a lot of this because the barriers to entry have actually dropped, not from a traditional bricks and mortar perspective, but anybody can put up a website of any sort and start selling goods. So there's perfect access. There's almost zero cost to doing that. Now, being successful at it, achieving scale and all the other things is a whole different kettle of fish, of course. But I think that as you start to think about whether this consolidation will drive prices up, no, it won't because you have this perfect competition. Will it drive more regulation? I don't think so, except in the areas of censorship and all of those areas. And if players, big tech like Google, continue to amass control that is not fairly shared, then I think you've got some threats there, but not on the retail side itself.
Thank you. And one final question is actually a combination of a couple of questions here on the chat. Are we overlooking the fact that people do need interaction, that they do want to mingle and touch and feel? And, what does this mean for the entertainment industry, which is, professional sports, movie theaters, et cetera, which is certainly a subset of consumption, if not, retail, but certainly has linkages to retail in terms of buying video games and sports apparel, et cetera. What are our thoughts on that?
I have a couple of thoughts, Dana. We talked about streaming, for example, that, spending on streaming has really increased, and that's a type of virtual experience, right? Instead of going to the movie theater, you're now spending more money on your streaming channels or services. And that type of infusion of a digital experience could also infiltrate retail, right? There's other opportunities there for being able to try clothes on, in a virtually augmented reality type of platform, or to see how certain household items are going to look in your home, what a rug looks like, what those curtains look like. So there is that opportunity to really infiltrate digital experiences in traditionally offline type shopping. And I think we'll also see that continue as we move forward.
Thank you. All right. I mean, unfortunately, we have tons of more questions on the chat, but we've run out of time. So if we just go to our slide 9 here, we just want to remind our participants of a few things before you hop off. For those of you who are C-suite executives, please be sure to fill out this year's C-suite challenge. Our goal is to have at least 2,000 responses. We're not quite there yet, but please be sure to participate, as the last day to do so will be this Friday. On the next slide, we're reminding everyone that on slide 10 that for continued updates on key COVID-19 related themes in real time, please visit our website, www.conference-board.org/COVID-19. The next slide. If you like this webcast, we have 3 more in the pipeline before the end of the year. Topics include the outlook for energy, trade, and intellectual property, and policy recommendations for the next U.S. administration. Then our final slide, we are asking that you please tune into our Indications podcast for discussions of the Conference Board's proprietary index. I just want to thank our guests, Elizabeth Crowfoot, Mike Archbold, and Steve Odland, and all of you for participating. Thank you again for joining us, and see you at our next event.